Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Students of the Word. This is session number 62. And today we're going to finish paragraph 10. Well, we won't finish with it, but we may finish it. So that is, I'm still going to want to go back and look at the bigger picture of paragraph 10, but we're going to see if we can get through the final sentence of paragraph 10 today. Though I think there's a word or two that we're going to want to look back at in the verse before. But let's jump to it. John is going to do, as he does so often, is going to bring together a bunch of the concepts that we've seen him working with both throughout the epistle to this point and quite recently, just in the last paragraph or two, as he comes together to the end of this paragraph. So let's read the paragraph again. For this is the message which you have heard from the beginning, that we are to love one another, not as Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother, or slaughtered his brother. And for what reason did he slaughter him? Because his own works were evil, but his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, brothers, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. The one who does not love remains in death. Everyone who hates his brother or sister is a man-killer. And you know that no man-killer has eternal life remaining in him. We know love by this, that he set out his life for us, and we ought to set out our lives for the brothers. But whoever has the life of the world and sees his brother in need and closes his bowels against him, his guts, how does the love of God remain in him? Little children, let's not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and truth. Hard to believe that there aren't more English translations that render that closes his bowels against him. Not even the King James goes there, admittedly. Okay. One of the things that you can begin to see, glancing ahead at the bigger picture, you'll notice that I was reading brothers instead of brothers and sisters. And I talked about this last time, but just to very briefly touch on it again, I have absolutely no opposition. Obviously, this is, not, I think, designed to be an exclusively gendered thing. And I'm perfectly I think that the inclusive language of brothers and sisters, certainly captures what he's doing, or what he's getting at. But the problem is that it also kind of conceals the sort of literary thing that he's doing in this paragraph. That is because of how he brings up Cain from the beginning. And so I wanted to hit brother all the way through when we read it that time, because when you start with Cain, right, when the very first sentence of this paragraph establishes, okay, you're supposed to love one another. Now, let me give you an illustration, right? Cain, here's what not to do, right? The first person who ever commits murder, the person who is surely the poster child for worst sibling ever, right? I'm not saying there aren't other candidates for that position, but clearly Cain is the captain of that particular softball team, right? So, anyway, so we are all in mind. This puts us in this whole sibling thing, right? And I think it's pretty clear that he's playing with the whole Cain idea all the way through this paragraph, right? Even down to do not be surprised, brothers, if the world hates you, right? Yeah, of course. Recapitulation of Cain, right? We have passed out of death. We have left death and gone into life because we love the brothers, the opposite of Cain, right? Who is, we get like sort of the second exile of Cain, right? As Cain is exiled because he hated his brother, right? Because he killed his brother. And so, but we in reversal have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. The one who does not love remains in death. Again, the inversion, right? Cain was not allowed to remain. He was booted out, right? He was, sent out to wander and go out into the world. But again, the reverse, the one who does not love remains. It's the remaining. So death is the place where you live. Being exiled from death into life is a good thing, right? Yeah. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, right? Again, the obvious link back to Cain there, as a person killer. We know love by this, that he set out his life. We ought to set out our lives for the brothers, right? Again, the explicit reversal of the Cain thing. Whoever has the life of the world and sees his brother or sister have need and closes his guts against him, how does the love of God remain in him? And then, of course, we're going to get the one final connection, and that's uh, the one of the most explicit connections. Little children, let's not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and truth. And it's the word deed that I'm talking about there. Now, praise, I appreciate that, but I know it's tricky. I know, and praise says, as a woman, I see brothers or brethren as inclusive of all humanity, including myself. But I know others have trouble thinking that way. Exactly, and I certainly don't want to be seeming to just kind of brush aside. Inclusive language can be really important. Sometimes you can lose, there can be forest and tree issues and that sort of thing. I mean, praise, I would say I've always heard that in a sort of in my ear, presumptively inclusive way as well. But many of my feminist colleagues from the 1990s with whom I went to grad school would have told me that that's just because I'm a man. But anyway, I hear you and I appreciate that. So I wanted to acknowledge it, right? But again, I think by reading Brothers and Sisters all the way through here, we really disconnect from this pretty dominant Cain and Abel thing that he's doing throughout this paragraph, and it's pretty complicated what he's doing. We'll come back next week. As I say, we're going to look at the paragraph as a whole, and we'll be considering its shape, and sort of what he's doing, like what the big picture of this and how all these things fit together a little bit better. So we'll look at that, how the Cain stuff works, Cain and Abel stuff works, and how it fits in with the other things that are going on here. But I just wanted to glance at it because, again, I think that's important. Now, Stephen was saying, does brothers and sisters make it sound too much like just a fancy way of saying ladies and gentlemen, whereas simply brothers highlights the familial relationship? In some ways, I mean, brothers and sisters, I mean, anytime you take something and you add in a long phrase, it does. I mean, there's no question that it reduces the impact of it a little bit. I mean, there's no question in my mind, rhetorically speaking, we ought also to lay down our lives for the brethren. Hits harder than we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers and sisters. It just, rhetorically speaking, it's more efficient, right? It works. Praise, I like siblings better too. If we're going to be inclusive, I would prefer to translate it siblings, because then at least you're not replacing a word with a more cumbersome phrase. In exactly, JJ, and in exactly the way I think you're talking about there. But yeah, I sorry, Stephen, I'm used to translating your name. Yeah. So I think I agree. I mean, you guys know my bias. Like if I were doing a translation, which I think we can all agree it's a good thing I'm not. I My principle would be to be to help English readers see what the author is doing in Greek as much as possible, as closely as possible. But I mean, yeah, the translations that people say are so literal that they're often very difficult to read in English, such as the King James, for instance, which is not just difficult to read because it's archaic. That's hard enough for a lot of people. But even if you know archaic English, there are some sentences in the King James that is just like, that's not even a complete sentence, right? Because they're following the Greek or the Hebrew so closely that it doesn't really parse in English. Anyway, if I did it, it'd be even worse than that. Totally worse than that. Um, yeah, Randall, that's exactly it. That's exactly the danger. Randall says, I find brothers and sisters tends to highlight the two groups rather than focusing on family members in a generic sense. That is, in my mind, from a sort of a rhetorical and even a syntactical standpoint, just from how the sentences are structured. That's why I say I think it's you're taking risks when you replace a word with a phrase like that in order to be inclusive. Um, uh, because yes, like life for the brothers and sisters. It almost because it's a compound phrase, it almost does invite you to kind of separate them, right? So I've got it laid on my life for the brothers and also for the sisters, right? As if that's two separate actions, right? Um, or something. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that's a logical necessity to think about it that way, but there is that kind of invitation. It is certainly possible to hear it that way, just separating and distinguishing the two things. And that's obviously not what's happening because he just used the one word, right, in Greek. So yeah, again, if I were doing the translation that I'm not that I wouldn't do because that would be silly. I think I would use siblings as well. Praise, a single word which is inclusive. Though praise, I think I'd probably go brothers in this paragraph specifically, so as to really make sure that we catch the Cain thing. Because again, the overall guiding principle of my highly inadequate translation would be trying to help the readers as closely as possible see what the author is doing in the Greek. Um, okay, but let's look at the other thing that he's doing in the Greek. I said the other strong connection with Cain was in deed and in truth. So let's look at that a little bit. Let's go down and check out the Greek here. Teknia, little children, not so we should not love. This is subjunctive again. Now, remember, we just had a big subjunctive construction in the previous sentence, right? Whoever might have the goods of the world and might see the brother of his brother having need, right? In those two theoretical subjunctive situations, oh, sorry, and might close up the heart of him, right? Connected with seeing the brother of him having need. Um, uh, how does the love of God abide in him? Indicative, right? Um, so we've just had this big subject, this three part, right? Um, might have, might see, might close. Yes. Um, so he does three consecutive subjunctive verbs, right? Whoever might have the goods and might see his brother having need and might close up his guts. How does the love of God abide in him? Um, so he then launches with another subjunctive. Little children, we should not love in word nor in tongue. So it's should implies that there's like an ought construction in there, right? I like the NASB, let's not love, right? That um though that suggests that it's imperative, like a first person plural imperative or something like that. Um, it is first person plural, but it is subjunctive, isn't it? Yeah, present subjunctive. Um, yeah. Now, unlike the previous verse, um, should you have worldly, if you should you have worldly goods, and should you see your brother and sister in need, and should you close your guts against them, right? So in that case, we have long, um, uh, that long uh, string of theoreticals, right? Verse 18 does not give us a theoretical construction. Um, if you should not love in word or tongue, right? That's not really true. Um, a hortatory subjunctive, Randall, that makes perfect sense. That is the kind of subjunctive that is involved in urging people to perform an action, right? Therefore, little children, conclusion, let us not love in logo, meta te glosse, in word or in tongue. Glosse. Hang on, I'll come back to glosse. Allah, but in ergo kai aletheia. In deed, agree the NASB and the King James. Um, what else we got here? Let's see. NIV actions. Okay. NRSV action. CEV uh, show love by truly helping them, not by merely talking about it. Okay. What is the message? The message going to cover itself with glory again? Let's see. Let's practice real love. Well, okay. Um, okay. Well, there's one word that none of them use here. Um, which well, it's okay. It's okay. The word they don't use is works, which seems to me ergo seems to be the literal meaning. Ergo works, things you do. Oh, I'm not criticizing the translation. Deed is perfectly fine. Just things that you do, right? Which is literally what the word deed means. Um, uh, the key thing is the connection. The NASB, for instance, does retain it in deed and in truth, because of course the word ergo was already used in this paragraph in a conspicuous place, right? Um, why did Cain slaughter his brother? Be hoti ta erga autu ponera, because the works of him, his deeds, were evil, and his brother's deeds, the word isn't repeated but implied through parallelism, but the those of his brother were righteous. So we've got ponera erga and dikaya erga. Right? We get that he establishes that paradigm once again through Cain and Abel. Doesn't name Abel, right, by name, but here we have the explicit reference to the brother of Cain, other than as the corpse in the piece. Um, because his works were evil and those of his brother were righteous. And John then exhorts us with the hortatory subjunctive at the end, um, and says, we should not love. Let us not love in word nor in tongue, but in works and in truth. Um, yeah, I was just about to come back to that. Um, Stephen, the tongue business. Um, yeah, in work, you're right. It is singular. Is the other one singular? No, it's plural. Yeah, Cain has multiple evil works, and Abel has multiple righteous works. That's really interesting. I think, yeah, I think this is one of those places. Um, remember way back when we were talking about singular sin versus plural sins, right? Um, whether we were wondering if John is trying to make a distinction between one who says they have no sin, right? Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the conversation we're having, Randall, that the singular seems to make it more as a conceptual category rather than a collection, a plural collection of individual actions. Yes, exactly. And we were thinking that way with sin and sins back in paragraph 2 also. That when you talk about sin, singular, you're talking about a conceptual category. Whereas when you talk about sins, you're talking about multiple instances of particular sinful acts, usually, right? That seems to be the general trend there. Um, and so he is connecting it back, but the difference here makes sense. Cain and Abel are historical figures, right? Their works are definite and completed, especially Abel's at the time because he's just been slaughtered, right? So his deeds are definitely in the past tense at this point. And of course, it's referring back to the historical Cain and his plural deeds. But here we are being enjoined to love in deed in general through works, as we might say. But that's a when we uh, when we translate. So look, there we go. That's a good reason not to use the word works to translate this, because then we lose that distinction, right? In Greek, the distinction between the singular and the plural. Because the word works functions as a conceptual noun, right? Like obviously, most people will be familiar, right, with the debate between faith, the salvation by faith or salvation by works, right? So the plural works is in fact in English often used, especially in uh, English modern Protestant tradition, used to point to a conceptual category, like a normal singular would be. So yeah, the singular work doesn't have the same connotations as the plural works. So yeah, maybe deeds is actually better. Maybe deeds, as long as you do it both ways, both times. Yeah, the NASB both preserves the repetition and also preserves the change from singular to plural. Yeah, yeah, I approve. Not that they need my approval. Sorry, I'm always qualifying this because of course I feel perfectly ridiculous. Like, judging the translation work of these people who like learn, know more about Greek, have known more about Greek since the end of their first semester in college than I, have ever learned, years ago. Anyway, whatever. It's all good. Okay. Before we go on to Aletheia, let's go back to word and tongue. Um, what is te? Is this a definite article? Oh, man, I can't stand it when the transliteration, not the transliteration, when the interlinear doesn't do it literally. Okay, so you say this is in. No, no, no. That's in. That's the word in. That's not the word in. I know it doesn't make sense in English, but just tell me what it is in Greek. Little children, not let us love in word nor the tongue. Yeah. So both of these nouns. So this is one. And okay, Randall, I'm so glad you're here tonight. And praise. Anybody who knows Greek better than me, which is almost everybody who knows Greek. So help me to understand the difference in Greek between implying the preposition through the case of the noun and actually giving the preposition, right? So, like, if, for instance, in the second half, he's got the two parallel constructions, right? We should love not in word or tongue, but in deed and truth, right? So we've got those two pairings. The second time he actually uses the preposition en, but en ergo kai aletheia, in deed and in truth, by implication, through parallelism, right? Um, and of course, ergo and aletheia are both in the dative case, and the dative case is what tends to be makes sense as the object of the preposition in, that it would take the dative. Why shouldn't it? And both logo and glosse are also in dative, but he doesn't use the preposition en there. He just puts them in the dative, and we're supposed to just like figure it out. So Randall says the simple dative is more ambiguous. Yeah, it is more ambiguous because just a noun's just sitting there in the dative case could theoretically be one of multiple different pronouns, or sorry, multiple different prepositions, right? That it could be implying multiple different prepositions. Now, you can say, um, you can say that the use of n in the second half, that the use of n in the second half of this pairing, right, of this balance, this parallelism, combined with the parallel structure that he's using, gives us a clear indication of what he's thinking, right? But it's second, right? By the time we get to that clarification, by the time we receive that clarity, a la en ergo, we've already been confused, right? The ambiguity has already had its impact upon us, right? Um, would you ever use the dative in Greek in the sense of by means of? Is that if you wanted to say to do something by means of something else, would you use the dative for that, or would you use a different case, do you think? I'm just trying to think. I'm ignoring the second half and I'm just reading the first half. Little children. We let us not love word tongue. Okay, there is an instrumental dative. Right. Because when I try to imagine, just knowing what I know of the dative case, PS, and hoping that how they use the dative in Greek is the same as how we would use it in Latin, with which I'm more familiar. Um, my first guess about you just plop in dative nouns as he's doing, right? Without any apologies, right? No prepositions, just dative nouns. My first impulse would be to say, little children, we should not love by means of word nor tongue. Um, but then he goes, but in action and truth, but in deed and truth. Right. Yeah. Randall says, which I would translate using with. Right. Let us not love with word or with tongue, but in action and in truth. Yeah. Yeah. I know it is. It is one of those moments where you would really like to find to do a little poll among native speakers of Koine Greek, right? In order to understand how that dative would hit them, right? How they would by default. And I say a survey of multiple native speakers of Koine Greek because presumably they wouldn't all agree, like they wouldn't all make the same associations, right? Um, but let me put it this way as well. Let me shape the sort of my own question here in a different way. For those of you who are familiar with the Greek, what would seem the more natural construction? To say, do not love with word or with tongue, or in word or in tongue, like with or in, which would be the more sort of natural construction, like the instrumental by means of, because I think that that is more natural. That strikes me as more natural. Like words are like how you do something. In particular, we're talking about loving here, right? Don't just love with word or with your tongue, right? By speaking. Um, yeah, but in action, but in deed and truth. So the word in, and I don't want to say that John only ever uses the word in one sense, but I would say, without apology or qualm, that John has given the preposition in a pretty important role in this epistle so far. Conceptually speaking, for something to be in something else has been really, really important, right? That's been a really important idea in this epistle. And it has tended to be used in exactly the sense that he just used it literally at the end of the sentence before. Mene en auto, abides in him. It's things abiding in and being in other things. Um, and of course, that's a dative construction too, right? So when he says, like, let's forget words and tongues for a second. If he just said, if he used his hortatory subjunctive, and not in the negative, but in the positive, if he just said, little children, let us love in deed and in truth, right? If he just said that with the preposition, like he does, right? Um, we would hear fairly firmly the echo, wouldn't we? How does the love of God abide in him? Little children, we should love in deed and in truth, right? You could hardly avoid the connection between God abiding in us and us loving in deed and in truth, right? I mean, just that's not only is that kind of in, like being within, coming and abiding within, most especially, right? Mene, remaining within. Um, that has been just this crucial and frequently repeated idea for John. But I don't think he's meaning it to be parallel in that way. I think there's a reason he didn't. I don't think that he does mean in word or in tongue. I think he means with word or with tongue. He's contrasting that to in deed and in truth. Because, of course, it's not just the difference of saying only with your words, but with your actions. By bringing in the preposition en, paralleling it to the use of mene in auto, of theu mene in auto that he just used in the previous sentence, I think that he's suggesting not only that deeds and truth are more substantial, more meaningful than words and tongues, like head to head or something, like, if you put them in a balance. It's not just that they're superior in that way, but that also partakes of the abiding, right? Deed and truth. That's what God abiding in us looks like. For us to love in deed and in truth. I don't think he's suggesting that we are in words or in tongues in the same kind of way at all. So I think he's using the vague dative, right, with or which probably means something like with or by means of. And that's supposed to sound really wussy compared to inaction and in truth, not just by actions and by truth. But again, it's part of the abiding, right? Our love is in that action in the same way that God is abiding in us. Yeah, yeah. Um, yes. Because of course, what should we be thinking of when we see this pairing? Word and tongue on the one hand, action and truth on the other hand. What should we be thinking about? What should we be remembering? Well, hang on, I'll go back into English. It's easier. If we say that we have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not do the truth. Yeah, something like that. But if we walk in the light, there we go, once again with the in there. Yes, if we say that we have no sin, we are deceiving ourselves, and the truth, aletheia, is not in us. Right. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. The one who says, I have come to know him, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him the love of God has truly been perfected, completed. By this we know that we are in him. The one who says that he abides in him ought himself also, just as he walked, to walk. He's been saying this the whole time, right? This words and deeds thing has been one of the fundamental pairings that he's been doing all the way along, right? The one who says he is in the light and yet hates his brother is in the darkness until now. Um, Stephen says it takes him back to worshiping in spirit and truth. Yes. Yeah, I agree. That is a really interesting parallel, Stephen. I'd have to look it up, but I would bet a nickel that John is using the N there with spirit and truth because it is very similar. It's not just by means of, right? Spirit and truth. It's in it in the way that we're being in the light and in the truth and in his love, right? And in him. Yeah. Um, so we've had this, as I say, we've had this distinction all along. Your words versus your deeds, right? And he's kind of bringing it back in at the end. Let us not love inward. Let us not love by means of words or by means of okay, yeah, confirmed. Thanks. It is in spirit and truth. Yes, yes, good, good. Yep, Stephen. I think that's exactly right. That seems exactly right. The same kind of thing. So yeah, if we did translate it that way, if we do hear that, if we do hear the difference, if we don't just assume that the in applies, which I don't think it does, we can see the distinction that he's making. We shouldn't just love by means of words or the tongue, definite article, but in deed and truth. Now, let's get back to logo mede te glosse, word or the tongue. Randall, you had a thing about words and tongues a little while ago that I wasn't ready for yet. Um, Right. And Stephen was asking, is there a difference between loving and word and loving with word and loving with tongue? Or is that just sort of a set phrase? Um, yeah, with the tongue absolutely looks instrumental. No, I think I've thoroughly convinced myself about this now, Randall. Um, yeah, yeah. Nor with the tongue. Yeah. Um, I think, and this might hinge on how the word mede is used. Mede, what kind of syntactical signals that's giving, right? But the our interlinear editor seems to believe that nor the tongue, nor by the tongue, or nor with the tongue is set apart here with as with commas, right? We have our editorially inserted commas here before and after this phrase. Um, that would suggest to me, Stephen, that instead of thinking that logo meta teglosse is like a single kind of figure of speech, that it's kind of the opposite of that. That he's saying, little children, let us not love by words, by word. And then he pauses and expands on that. Um, nor in the tongue. Oh yeah, this is a not nor. Me mede. Right. Me agapomen logo. Mede te glosse. Huh. Okay. Right. I see that. So that's a neither nor. So this is not just not. This is neither. Uh, if that is, if those are paired, me mede. Hmm. Let us, so then it would be, children, let us love neither with word nor with the tongue. Would it be a neither nor like that? Children, let us love neither with word nor with the tongue, but in deed and in truth. Okay. Yeah, the May Day, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So that this is a negative, which is an adverb, which is negating the verb. But in that sense, it is setting up those two as a genuine pairing rather than so. In other words, Randall, we're disagreeing with our interlinear editor here. I would not put that first comma in. If this is the neither nor, I wouldn't put in that first comma at all. Um, little children, we should love neither with word nor with the tongue, but in deed and truth. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, but it makes it a little weirder as a neither nor, doesn't it? Because when you say neither nor, it's usually two things, right? Right. Like, I shall have neither the beef nor the chicken, but rather the fish, right? Like if you're choosing on an airplane menu or something, right? Um, whereas, yeah, pairing the word and the tongue with neither and with neither nor suggests that they're two separate items on the list. Like as separate from each other as like the beef and the chicken are two separate choices on the menu that I'm choosing on in my silly example, right? Um, we should love neither in word nor in tongue. It suggests that yeah, as I say, those are two different things. But it seems that he's really just trying to emphasize the same thing, separated but coordinated. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, I see what you're doing. Okay. Randall's suggesting something more like, let us not love, let us not love in word and not with the tongue. Let us not love with let us let us not love with word and not with the tongue. Okay, I see. So it's not exactly a neither nor like we would use a neither nor construction in English. Yeah. Yet they are kind of synonymous. That's what I was just now thinking, Randall, that kind of repetition sounds very Hebrew poetry, doesn't it? To talk about don't do something with words, don't do something with the tongue, repeated, right? As if you're saying, like, sounding like it's two different things, but it's kind of the same thing said in two different ways, but it's not exactly the same, right? That's a very Hebrew poetry kind of approach, right? And what's more, it is also a very Hebrew poetry kind of approach to do those two things, right? Like if you said something like, we should not love with words, nor should we love with the tongue, but we should love indeed and in truth. That three-part structure is exactly how a lot of the Proverbs work, right? Um, Let us not do this, nor with the second thing, which is quite like the first thing and almost a restatement of it, but instead this third thing, right? Yeah, that sounds that sounds really Hebrew. I agree. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Does that make sense, Stephen? Can you hear that? If you think about it in that kind of Hebrew poetry way, um, little children, let us not love with word and not with the tongue, but in deed and truth. Yeah, right. And the third phrase is a compound with a single preposition, in deed and truth. Yes, exactly. So it's not exactly two parts balanced. If we think about it that way, with the Mayday as our the Mayday Allah cues, right? Then we can see what looks like a three-part Hebrew poetry construction. He ends it like a proverb. Basically, it sounds a lot like one of the proverbs. I mean, heck, this could be a proverb, right? I mean, if you took this sentence, and put it into Hebrew and slipped it into proverbs, would anybody notice? Right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know people would notice, but you know what I mean. It would certainly be at home there, wouldn't it? Take out the little children. That's a little bit less proverbial. Well, actually, no. Just make it singular. Put in my son instead, and then it would sound exactly like the Proverbs. Yeah. We should not love with word. We should not love, nor should we love with the tongue, but we should love in deed and truth. Yep. No, that's totally it. That's totally it. It sounds like your pastor making up a rhyme to be memorable. Yeah, well, your pastor has probably read a bunch of Psalms and Proverbs. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, no, that's I'm super. I'm totally convinced now, uh, Randall, that's the construction. You're so correct about the Hebrew structure there. Yeah, yeah. Okay. And by the way, I would also add, makes me more than ever convinced that this is the end of the paragraph, right? Um, because then when he goes on to, and by this we will know um, that we are of the truth. Um, is entuto. How many times have we seen him like transition into a new thought with the phrase entuto? Like in this thing I just talked about in the previous paragraph. Now we're gonna move it through. We're gonna think about a different thing as a result of it, right? No, I am totally convinced that paragraph, that verse 18 is the end of the paragraph. Um, the whole rhetorical structure, the whole Proverbs shape of the ending there. Yeah, that's the end. And then we've got the en tuto. Cain. And by this, we know. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay. So that's cool. So that makes sense why it would be word and so that already that now is preemptively answered the word and tongue thing. They are synonyms, or rather they are the sort of quasi synonyms, right? In Hebrew poetry, a repetition in Hebrew poetry is never actually just a synonym, right? You're never just saying exactly the same thing the second time. So actually, let's think about it like Hebrew poetry. How does the second line, how does the second repetition make us think about the idea in a new way, right? Um, because it emphasizes what loving with words is. We might uh, we might possibly convince ourselves that loving someone by means of words is a good thing. And it can be a good thing, right? I don't want to take away from that, right? Loving words can be really impactful. Um, but when you then take that and you put that on kind of more literal ground, right? It's one thing to say, I love my brothers by means of words, right? That's me. I bestow loving words upon my brothers. Good for you, man. That's awesome, right? But then when you follow that up by saying, yes, I love my brothers with my tongue, that begins to show how hollow that is, right? How weak that is, especially when immediately then contrasted, Allah, but indeed and truth. Notice that he didn't even have to say that the words were false. I mean, he's got the opposite of aletheia out there, right? We've been talking about lies previously. Oh, hang on. I'm blanking. Somebody help me. What's the Greek word for lie? The one that he pairs with truth. Um, who is a liar? But I'm blanking on the Greek word there. Anyway, uh, he's got that available, right? He's got that word available, but he doesn't use it here. He's not. He doesn't even need to oppose falsehood and truth here. Though again, remember the pattern that we've had. We have seen examples of loving, like loving God in word only. To say that you have fellowship with God and yet walk in the darkness, right? To say that you know God and yet to not keep his commandments, right? Um, to say that you're in the light and yet to hate your brother. Um, yeah, yeah. Anyway, yeah, what is the in paragraph 2? Who is the liar? Um, yeah, it's pseudos. Yeah, there it is. Right, I've written to you not because you don't know the truth, but because you know the truth, the aletheia, and because no lie is of the truth, no pseudos is of the aletheos. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, who is the liar? Pseustes. Exactly. That's it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So he could be talking about aletheia and pseudos. He's had that, right? He has that. Um, they're available to him, but he doesn't. He he goes beyond that, right? Because the problem is not only with people. I mean, yeah, obviously it's bad to say that you love someone and not actually love them in deed and truth, right? It would be bad to lie about it. But notice what he's basically saying here, that if you say it, but you don't do it, indeed, in ergo kai aletheia, in deed and truth, it is a lie, essentially. It's just words. And what is a word that has no substance behind it? Well, exactly like all those other words. People who say that they're in the light when they hate their brothers. It's exactly the same thing as that, in fact, right? Um, yeah, yeah. So that was Devorah has an excellent question. What about, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go ab arches here. Um, Devorah and I were both thinking of the same thing when we got to the word and the tongue, and that was the logo tezoes, the word of life. So logo, that's a good thing, right? Word, that's an important the word is an important thing, right? Um, I mean, if you just kind of take that out of, like on its own, sort of out of context, to say don't love in logo, don't love with the word sounds surprising, right? Um, Now, one thing, of course, that you could say is once again that distinction that Randall was discussing before, the distinction between a specific, like the definite article and using the word in the singular without the definite article, right? With word, as opposed to with the word, right? Um, the word of life is very much the word of life, not just um, the abstract concept of words. And as this clearly is, right? So that's one way in which the syntax of it, Devorah does signal that we're not talking about the word here. Um, but I will say, Devorah, I I still think that that this question that you have, which, as I said, was my first thought too when I was reading this sentence. I mean, my first reaction was, on the one hand, this is a very natural sort of conclusion to this paragraph. But on the other hand, isn't it weird? I mean, isn't that a little weird that we're undermining the concept of logos? That we're saying words don't matter. I mean, yeah, sure. He's not literally saying that Jesus doesn't matter, right? He's not literally like disowning the second person of the Trinity or something like that. But um, but still, like, isn't it kind of counterintuitive work for him to be doing, to be loading, um, to be inviting us to sort of be thinking words aren't enough. Words don't matter when, since he's all about the word of life, shouldn't he be building up the word? And it's important even, in sort of literary parallel. Um, but of course, we've been seeing this shape from the beginning. We haven't talked about it. Like we haven't talked about it enough to be disturbed by it yet, but um Devorah, since you and I were both disturbed a little bit by it in this verse, we might as well raise it, right? He invoked the concept of the word of life. Um, he was speaking of Jesus, of the manifestation of the life of the age, there in the first verse, right? Um, so he establishes that the word of life, the revelation of the word of life being the whole deal, the thing to be proclaimed at the beginning of the epistle. And then he goes on to draw words into question all the way through. After that first reference, I don't know what the plural of logoi. Um, I'm not, I don't, I don't know what the nominative plural would be. Logoi. Hey, I was right. I guessed correctly. The logoi, he calls logoi into question for the whole rest of the, like, he basically puts them in the category of dubiousness for the whole rest of the epistle so far, right? Um, everybody, every time he has talked about, you say this, like your words are over here. He's only brought up words ever since that one reference to the word of life. He's only brought up words to contrast them to deeds unflatteringly, right? He's only brought up words to suggest they're empty compared to deeds. And that what matters is how you walk, how you keep the commandments, how you love your brother. And now, specifically, the mechanism by which you love your brother, not with word or with the tongue, but in deed and truth. So, this is kind of the culmination thus far, right, of that kind of trend. And Devora, I agree with you. It feels a slightly uncomfortable one, right? Um, I mean, this like, the culmination, I mean, because it's like, it's a rejection of words. The message is words, words don't matter. In fact, as I was suggesting, he doesn't even have to say, okay, the words that I'm rejecting here are the specific subset of words that we call lies. Those are bad, right? But other true words, words can be connected with truth, right? And so those are good words, presumably. But everything he showed us has been like, yeah, if those words, if your words are true, then what matters is their truth. That is what matters is that you're like, it doesn't matter what you say, it only matters how you walk. Right. And if your words do in fact line up with your walk, that's good. But that it's not your words. It's still not your words that matter. It's your walk that matters. Right. As I say, he doesn't say, little children, we should love not in lies, in lies of the tongue, lies of the poets, right? He doesn't say that. He says we should not love in words, but in deeds and truth. In deed and truth. Um, yes. Well, Stephen, that's exactly the awkwardness, isn't it? For God, word and deed are one. Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Now, again, obviously, I'm not arguing that John is in fact undermining the logos thing, right? I'm not saying that this again, it's my argument isn't here that John is teaching against the second person of the Trinity or the identification of the word or anything, that he's taking back, John chapter 1 or any of that sort of thing. That isn't the point. The point, I think, would be this. To this point, no, at this point in the epistle, what I would, I mean, you can tell I'm an English teacher at heart, right? What I would say in the margin, if I were like, grading this epistle, right? Responding to, let me just say, if I were responding to this epistle, in the margin next to verse 18, I would write, hey, John, this seems to imply that words are pointless, as you've been suggesting, right? If we look at the pattern leading up to this and then what you say here, it seems like you're pointing us away from the idea of the word of life, which you started with, right? So are we going to get back to that? How are we going to get back to that from here with what he's done about words, right? The position that he's given logoi in this epistle so far. And we don't have the answer to that yet. We're only halfway through the epistle, really. So there's more to come. We'll see we'll see what happens. But Devora, I think it's a really important thing to keep an eye on here. How are we going to get back to? Are we going to get back to it? The word of life thing explicitly in that term? Um, uh, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, praise. I agree that God's word being his deed is from the very beginning with let there be light. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, yes. Yes. Um, but yeah, we can absolutely build a theology on that. My point is only that John isn't here explicitly, right? Um, like we can preserve it, right? We can make it make sense, but John isn't making it make sense yet. If we're going to get back to the word of life, which we may, it hasn't landed yet, and that's okay. It's okay. He's got half an epistle left, right, in which to kind of land that and bring that back in. Um, uh, but yes, also, Randall, I agree. There is nothing controversial in what he's saying here, right? And I mean that in the sense that there's like it's not like there's no theological problem that he's raising here. And indeed, as Randall is pointing out, this is extremely orthodox Jewish theology, right? Um, the prophets are all about this kind of thing. Um, uh, Randall was reminded of the passage in Hosea where God says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Um, yes, don't give me words. Don't worship me by means of words and the tongue, right? But rather in deed and in truth. That's, yeah, yeah. Um, the God of the Old Testament who speaks through the Hebrew prophets would totally agree with that statement, right? Absolutely, absolutely. So again, I don't want to, I'm not saying at all that there's anything like weird or strange or abnormal going on here. All I'm saying is John's not landed this plane yet. If he's going to land it, it hasn't landed yet. Um, I I think that Devora is right to point out that what he's doing with the word logo here is it's not in contradiction of, but it's pushing in a very different direction. Yeah, he could have emphasized instead about how with God, word and deed are one, that the word of life is the aletheia. Totally could have said that. Totally believes it, I'm sure, but that's not what he said, right? That's not, in fact, the rhetorical work that this epistle has done. Instead, ever since that first reference, all of the references to words have all been unflattering. And words in general have been almost equated with lies. Almost. At the very least, they've been downgraded to something very close to worthless. Because what matters, what is connected with truth, is not, again, a subset of words, it's deeds. That's what gets at truth. Randall, and exactly, Hosea would stand up and applaud, presumably, right? Okay, assuming Hosea had no problem with the message that he was conveying, which of course, anyway, never mind. I'm like, well, I'm not going to draw any conclusions about Hosea personally, right? But anyway, you see what I mean, right? Um, yeah, yeah, um, yeah. We'll see. Um, right. Randall is thinking in terms of a Hebrew proverb, um, so Randall, you're sort of taking that like by implication, when God says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, he's not saying, I don't want sacrifice at all. The implicit statement there is, I desire mercy and not only sacrifice, right? That like that would be the kind of implied, not just only in that one place, but like proverbially that it would kind of, the whole phrasing sort of would fit in with the phrasing that he's doing there in verse 18. I agree. I agree. Um, but again, there I point to the trend through the epistle as a whole, right? And the trend in the epistle is the trend in the epistle as a whole. He has only ever, is this true? Only ever brought up words. Hang on. Thought of an important exception. He has generally brought up speaking, using the tongue in that unflattering way, right? Where the word is not matching up with the deed, right? Um, but here's the exception. Here's the exception. Um, back in paragraph 7, when he's talking about lies and liars. Who is the liar but the one that denies that Jesus is the Christ, that Jesus is the Messiah? This is the anti-Messiah. This is the Antichrist, the Antichristo, the one who denies the Father and the Son. So let's go back to 2. Scroll all the way down to 22. Where did we go? There we go. There we go. Who is the liar, Pseustes, if not the denying one, Numenos, which totally sounds like a city on the island of Numenor, that Jesus is the Christ, the denying one, that Jesus is the Christ. This is the Antichristos, the denying one, the denying the Father and the Son one. Pasho Numenos, each of the denying ones, each of the denying the Son ones doesn't have the Father either. However, ho homologon, here's my exception. The homologon, the Son. What is translated confessing, but Devorah, see, the interesting thing is that translating it confessing hides the word logo here. Here's our positive logo, right? Speaking the same logos, exactly. Homo logon, the same speaking one, the same words, the matching words one. The one whose words match with the idea of the Son also has the Father. Yes. Yep. The homologon. That's the one. That's our one counterexample. And of course, homologon as a concept is very, if to say one thing and do another, to have your words on the one hand be like one way and your actions and deeds on the other hand be a different way, that's to be a liar, right? When you do that, the truth is not in you. He says that several times in paragraph 2 and 3, right? Truth isn't in you if you do one thing and if you say one thing and do another, right? That makes you a liar because the truth isn't in you. But if you homologon, here in paragraph 7, he's talking about confessing the Son. If you say the same, the concept, right? The idea that has been put forward is that this Jesus guy is the son of the Father. And if you say the same, if your words match up with that, if they line up with that, then you have the Father also, right? But that idea of your words matching up, your words lining up, the homologon concept, right, is exactly the opposite of all of the logo stuff that he's all the pseuste stuff, right? When you say one thing and do another, well, you're not homologoing your own actions there, right? If you see what I mean, that's that word. I don't know that that word would ever be used in that context. That might be a huge like syntactic strain in Greek. That's why I'm speaking of, if you see what I mean, the homologon concept, right? The word confess is a wonderful word. I love that English word. I love it in its older senses. It's a very rich word in its older sense. Um, not only meaning to admit something you did wrong, but uh, to confess that Jesus is Lord. To confess like Edward the Confessor confessed. He wasn't somebody who took confession, right? Um, uh, yeah, yeah. He's the one who made confession, who professed the truth. Sometimes we still use that word in that sense, but we rarely use the word confess in that sense anymore. But anyway, so I love that word, but I don't love it because, again, it, as I said before, it doesn't make obvious what John is doing in the Greek there. And what he's doing is showing the kind of logoi that do count for something, the kind of logoi that line up. If your words line up with your actions, those are good words. Oh, it's the actions themselves that really matter anyway, right? So, I mean, that's good. Like, it's, um, but when your words line up with truth, with God's truth, like Jesus is the Son of God, right? Um, then that's really important. So hang on to this. There's no spoilers or anything, but there's more to come on this whole words and speaking thing, right? In fact, in chapter 4, um, which feels like the very distant future still, but nevertheless, we are marching inexorably chapter forwards. Um, and when we get there, we'll see that there's going to be a lot. We're going to get a crisis of the whole words and truth and lies thing. That's going to become a significant focus in chapter 4. So we'll come back to that. But I do think I'm glad we thought of this this distinction, because there is that one way in which words are good, apart from the word of life thing at the very beginning, other place where words are good, and that's the homologon there. Okay, cool. Excellent. Was there anything else I wanted to? Oh, I didn't say anything about Teknia. This is our first use of Teknia since the big reveal. Right? Hang on. What does he use in verse 10? In verse 10, he says Tekna. Right. En tuto. In this is revealed the Tekna, the children of God, the Tekno to Theo, and the Tekna to Diabolou. There it is. Okay. But that's in paragraph 9. But in paragraph 8, we had the whole children thing revealed. Now, little children. Now, Teknia, right? Teknia? He only uses paideia a couple times. Verse 28. And now Teknia. Kainin Teknia. Yep. Kainun, sorry. Teknia. Okay. Um, but as I say, paragraph 8 is where we got the big reveal there, right? Um, See how great a love the Father has bestowed on us. See what kind of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the Tekna tu Theou, that we should be called the children of God. I've been calling you little children, not just in a cute way to say that I love you like a father, but because I've been addressing you through this entire epistle as children, because you are the children of God. Now we are the Tekno tu Theou. Um, but notice how uh, you could say, I'm not saying that he's doing this. One could make the argument, though, that he kind of walks that back a little bit in paragraph 9, doesn't he? Right? I've been calling you children because you are called the children of God, and you are, right? So through this whole epistle, now you know why I've been addressing you as little children this whole time. And I just love that payoff, right? But then again, he doesn't exactly walk it back. But by this, the children of God and the children of the devil are obvious. Oh, yeah. So you're kind of children either way, right? Teknia to be claimed later. I don't think he's actually trying to undermine beautiful revelation that he made back there in paragraph 8 when he says that in paragraph 9. But, um, uh, but he, but think back to paragraph 7, right? I mean, he was talking about, um, they went out from us, but they were not really of us. For if they had been of us, they would have remained with us, but they went out so that it should be shown that they all are not of us. So there were some Tekna tu Diabolu among them, in fact, among the Tekna tu Theou, right? And it was Ephanerothate, it was revealed who was whom, right? The Tekna tu Diabolu were revealed by their works, were revealed when they did not remain, when they did not mene in us, right? Um, this is going to come up again, in the next paragraph or the beginning of chapter 4. So yeah, it comes up again. But anyway, so Teknia, we now, having seen him develop that, now when he comes back to calling them Teknia, to addressing them as little children, as he's done throughout the epistle, that now has this new weight, right? Not only the glorious and really beautiful new weight of how he did that payoff and reveal of the Tekna tu Theou, but also that question of which one are you, you know, are you remaining in death or are you living in life now, right? Which Tekna are you? But anyway, again, even this sentence we've been looking at all day itself suggests that, right? Teknia, little children of whichever parent. Let us not love with word, nor with the tongue, but in deed and truth. Because if you do that, then you will know that you know him. Because how do we know that we know him? By keeping his commandments, which is loving in deed and truth, right? Yeah, yeah. So this is how you know what kind of Tekna you are, right? What kind of Teknia, little children, Tekna tu The or Tekna tu Diabolo. Yes. Okay. And yes, yeah, he did use it again. He did address them again in 3:7. That's in paragraph 9, right? Paragraph 9 or the end of paragraph 8. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, we're not going to look ahead because that's the next paragraph. So next time I want to go back and look at maybe we will begin the next paragraph too next time, but I definitely want to look back and make sure we're not, because there's a lot happening here. Remember when we talked about verse 11? For this is the message which you have heard ab arches? No, me neither. That was ages ago, right? So let's go back and look at how we talked a little bit about the Cain thing. We've talked a little bit about the logoi, right? And how that fits in with the patterns. Let us take a couple steps back and look at the paragraph as a whole next time, seeing how it fits in with the overall shape a little bit more. Then we'll move on. And now it's time for paragraph 11. I keep calling this paragraph 11 accidentally, but it shall be time next time for us at least to glance ahead at the next paragraph. All right. Thanks everybody for joining me, and I will see you again next time. Bye now.